A college student was assaulted by a 325-pound football player and knocked unconscious on the sidewalk. But he didn't wake up in seconds. He lived an entire life. He met a woman, dated her for months, married her after 2 years. She gave him a daughter, then a son 2 years later. He had a career. He spent a decade raising his children. Then, one day, sitting on his couch, he noticed something wrong with a lamp. The perspective was inverted. He stared at it for 3 days straight, without eating or drinking, until he realized the lamp isn't real. His wife isn't real. His kids aren't real. 10 years of memories gone. He woke up on the sidewalk. Only minutes had passed. And what happened next destroyed him. This happened during a Reddit user's last semester at college. They were walking across campus when a football player decided he wanted to drive through the area where the poster was walking. What followed was a violent assault. The poster describes the size difference. Note, he was 325 pounds. I was 120 pounds. 325 pounds versus 120 pounds. The outcome was inevitable. The poster was knocked unconscious. They collapsed on the ground. Their body was lying on the sidewalk surrounded by strangers, but their consciousness went somewhere else entirely. The poster explained what happened next. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. Not a dream, not a vision. A life, complete, real, spanning years. They met someone, a woman. The poster describes her simply but powerfully. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. This wasn't casual attraction. This was profound, the kind of connection that changes everything. The poster pursued her for months, not days, months of effort. They dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before finally winning her over. 2 years later, they got married. The poster states, after 2 years, we got married and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. They had a child, a daughter. Then, when the daughter was 2 years old, she bore me a son. The poster describes their life with precision. I had a great job and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house. They had stability, a career, a family. The poster was devoted. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him and my daughter. Every morning, before work. This was routine, daily life, years of it. But here's where it gets harder to explain. One day, the poster was sitting on the couch in their home, and they noticed something. A lamp. Just an ordinary lamp in their living room. But something about it was wrong. The poster describes it. I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. They provide specific details about this lamp. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim, on 4 legs, and a white square shade. They remember this lamp with perfect clarity because they couldn't stop looking at it. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. Think about that. Something about this object was so fundamentally wrong that it captured their complete attention. Not for minutes, for hours. The poster writes, I stayed up all night staring at that lamp. All night. An entire night spent staring at a lamp because its perspective was inverted. That's strange enough, but there's more. The next morning came, time for work, but the poster didn't go. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. They couldn't leave, couldn't look away. Whatever was wrong with this lamp demanded their attention. Then the poster stopped eating. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first,
Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. Read that again. They stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped using the bathroom. They just sat on the couch, staring at the lamp. For 3 days. I stared at the fucking lamp for 3 days. What happened next made it impossible to dismiss. By this point, the poster's wife was terrified. Her husband had been sitting on the couch for 3 days, not eating, not drinking, not moving, just staring at a lamp. My wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. Someone came to intervene, to break whatever trance the poster was in. But it was too late. The poster describes their mental state. By this time, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. Reality was fragmenting. The poster's awareness was coming apart. The wife took action. She took the kids to her mother's house. She removed the children from the situation, got them somewhere safe, because something was very wrong with her husband. And then the poster had their epiphany. The lamp is not real. The house is not real. My wife, my kids, none of that is real. The last 10 years of my life are not fucking real. 10 years. A decade of life. Marriage, children, career, daily routines, memories, all of it. Not real. The poster describes what happened next. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. The lamp consumed their vision. Red, just red. Then sounds. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises. And then, pain. I became aware of pain, a fucking shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth," and opened my eyes. They opened their eyes, not in their living room, not on their couch, on a sidewalk. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know. Lots were freaking out. I was completely confused. Surrounded by strangers, on the ground, in pain, missing teeth, the poster was completely confused. Because seconds ago, or was it years ago, they had been sitting on a couch with a wife and children, and now they were lying on pavement with broken teeth and strangers staring at them. And that's when the timeline stopped making sense. The poster had been knocked unconscious by the assault. While lying on the sidewalk, they lived 10 years. Met someone, fell in love, got married, had 2 children, raised those 2 children, worked a job, built a life. Then that life began to break down when they noticed an impossible lamp. They stared at it for 3 days until reality collapsed and they woke up on the sidewalk. How much time had actually passed? Minutes. Maybe a few minutes. Enough time for a crowd to gather, for someone to call emergency services, for a police officer to arrive. The poster describes the aftermath. At some point, a cop scooped me up, dragged, walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. They were arrested, or detained. The cop didn't wait for an ambulance. I was taken to the hospital by the cop. Seems he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive and give CT scans and shit. CT scans. Medical evaluation. Checking for brain damage, because the poster had been knocked unconscious by a 325-pound man. Their body had been injured, but their mind had lived 10 years.
Let's break down what we can confirm. First, the assault was real. This happened on a college campus during the poster's last semester. A physical altercation occurred. The size difference, 325 pounds versus 120 pounds, meant the poster had no chance. They were knocked unconscious. This is verifiable. Witnesses saw it. A police officer responded. The poster was taken to a hospital and given CT scans. Second,
The unconsciousness lasted minutes, not years. The poster woke up on the sidewalk surrounded by people. Emergency response time for campus incidents is typically 5 to 15 minutes. The crowd was still there. The situation was still active. This wasn't hours later. This was shortly after the assault. Third, the poster remembers 10 years in detail. Not vague impressions, specific memories. They remember pursuing the woman for months. They remember the wedding after 2 years. They remember their daughter being born. They remember when the daughter was 2 and the son was born. They remember their morning routine, going into their son's room every day before work. They remember the lamp, red base with gold trim, 4 legs, white square shade. These aren't scattered fragments. This is a complete, coherent narrative spanning a decade, with emotional content. The poster describes their wife making their heart skip and their face red. They describe their son as the joy of my life. These are feelings, not just facts. Now consider this aspect. The poster didn't just dream random events. They experienced linear time. Years progressed logically. Relationship timeline, months of pursuit, 2 years of dating, marriage, immediate pregnancy, daughter born, 2 years pass, son born. Career timeline, established job, stable enough that wife didn't need to work. Parenting timeline, son grew from infant to 5 years old, daily routines with both children. And here's another detail that doesn't fit. The lamp. Why a lamp? Why would the crack in this reality appear as an inverted lamp? The poster couldn't explain it. The perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. They knew it was wrong, but couldn't articulate how. Just that the perspective was impossible. For 3 days, the poster stared at this lamp. In their experienced reality, they sat on a couch for 72 hours without eating or drinking while their wife tried to intervene and eventually removed their children from the house. That's not a brief moment of confusion. That's an extended period of breakdown within the dream life itself. The poster's cognizance was breaking up before they woke. Reality was fragmenting from the inside. The realization came in stages. The lamp isn't real. The house isn't real. The wife isn't real. The kids isn't real. 10 years aren't real. Each piece of their life stripped away until nothing remained but the truth. Then, sensory overload. The lamp growing, consuming their vision, turning everything red. Voices in screams. Then pain. Then awakening on the sidewalk. But wait, there's something else. The poster's first words after waking were, "I'm missing teeth." Not "where am I?" or "what happened?" Their first awareness was of specific physical damage. The teeth had been knocked out during the assault. But the poster had just lived 10 years without missing teeth. In their experienced reality, their teeth were fine. They ate meals. They smiled at their children. They went to work, all with a complete set of teeth. Waking up with teeth missing would be shocking, jarring, evidence that something was very wrong with the reality they'd been experiencing. If this were simply a dream, you'd expect confusion upon waking, disorientation, trying to remember where you are. But the poster's reaction suggests they retained awareness of both realities simultaneously. They knew something was wrong with their teeth because they remembered having teeth in the life they just left. And they immediately recognized that this physical reality, the one with missing teeth and strangers and sidewalk, was the real one. And then, when they shared this online, something unexpected happened. When this was posted to Reddit, the response was overwhelming. This post has become legendary in the glitch in the Matrix community. The poster notes in their edit,
never thought anyone would read this, but thousands did, and many recognized elements of this experience. The poster received many PMs describing similar experiences. Multiple people contacted them privately to share their own stories of living alternative lives during brief, unconscious periods. This isn't unique. It's rare, but it happens. 3 commenters stated, "Such experiences are impossible." The poster's response is direct. "I'd say more research needs to be done on brain functions. Pre-med students, don't assume you know everything." Researchers who study consciousness and brain injury have documented unusual time dilation effects. During trauma, particularly head trauma, the brain's perception of time can distort dramatically. Minutes can feel like hours, but hours feeling like years? That's less documented. Neurologically, memory formation requires time. Creating the neural pathways for a decade of memories should take a decade. But the poster formed these memories in minutes. Either the memories were somehow compressed, experienced in accelerated time, or they were constructed retrospectively as the poster woke up, creating a false history that felt real. But the poster's description doesn't sound like retrospective construction. They described living through events. They described the progression of a relationship, marriage, children growing. They described daily routines. Compressed time might explain this. If subjective experience can speed up, you could theoretically experience years in minutes. Some researchers point to dreams as evidence this is possible. In dreams, we experience complex narratives that seem to span hours, but occur during brief REM cycles. However, dream time is typically confused and nonlinear. The poster's experience was coherent and linear. 10 years, in order, with consistent details. The poster mentions they've never seen Inception, the 2010 film about dreams within dreams and time dilation, but the similarity is striking. In that film, time moves slower in deeper dream states. 5 minutes of real time equals hours in the dream. The poster's experience mirrors this concept, but far more extreme. Psychologists would note the emotional content. The poster didn't just experience events, they formed attachments. They fell in love. They felt joy when their son was born. They had daily routines they cared about. When they woke, they weren't just confused. They were devastated. The poster describes what came after. "I went through about 3 years of horrid depression." 3 years. That's how long it took to grieve the loss of a wife and children that never existed. "I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed." This isn't the reaction to a dream. When you wake from a dream, you might feel momentarily sad, but you quickly recognize it wasn't real. The poster couldn't do that. The experience was too complete, too real. The memories, too vivid. "I was scared that I was going insane, as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have." The poster desperately wanted to return to that reality, to see the wife again, even knowing she wasn't real, even knowing it all was a construction. The grief was real. The loss was real. And sometimes, the poster still sees the son. "Sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says." The son is frozen at 5 years old, the age he was when the poster's reality broke down. Not growing, not changing, just appearing occasionally at the edge of vision, a remnant of a life that never happened. Similar reports have emerged from people who have experienced severe trauma or near-death experiences. Entire lifetimes lived in moments. Alternate realities that feel completely real until something breaks the illusion. One commenter mentioned a Star Trek The Next Generation episode with this exact premise. A character lives an entire lifetime while unconscious, with family and career.
then wakes up to find only minutes have passed. Which brings us back to the central question.
So how do we explain this? Let's start with the neurological explanations. When the brain experiences trauma, particularly impact trauma, neurons can fire in unusual patterns. Some researchers suggest that during unconsciousness, the brain might generate experience simulations to protect consciousness, a kind of emergency program that runs while the physical body is incapacitated. But here's where that explanation struggles. Why would the brain generate a 10-year timeline? What evolutionary advantage comes from experiencing a decade of fake life during a brief knockout? If the brain's goal is protection, wouldn't a shorter, simpler experience suffice? The dream explanation is more common. Maybe the poster had a very vivid dream during those minutes. Dreams can feel real. They can have emotional content. And the brain sometimes fills in details retroactively, creating false memories of progression that actually happened instantly upon waking. But the poster's experience doesn't match typical dream characteristics. Dreams are usually non-linear. They jump around. They have impossible elements that we accept while dreaming, but recognize as absurd when we wake. The poster's experience was coherent, linear, realistic. The only impossible element was the lamp. And that's what broke the illusion. Could this be confabulation? Maybe the poster woke up confused, and their brain constructed a narrative to explain the gap in consciousness. But confabulation typically produces fragmented, inconsistent stories, and it doesn't produce grief. The poster grieved for 3 years. You don't grieve for confabulated memories. Perhaps there's a time perception explanation. Maybe the poster's subjective experience of time dilated dramatically during the trauma. What felt like 10 years was actually compressed into seconds of real time, but experienced at an accelerated rate. This would mean the poster actually lived through those experiences, just in fast forward. This theory has some support. Time perception is subjective and brain-dependent. During high-stress situations, people report time slowing down. Maybe the opposite can happen, time speeding up. If subjective time can compress, you could theoretically experience years in minutes. But what if something genuinely unexplainable occurred? Some frameworks for understanding consciousness suggest that we don't create consciousness, we receive it. That consciousness exists independently of the brain, and the brain acts as a receiver or filter. If this is true, then during unconsciousness, when normal brain function is disrupted, consciousness might access other streams, other realities, other timelines. In this interpretation, the poster didn't imagine a wife and children. They experienced an actual alternative timeline where they had a wife and children. And when they woke on the sidewalk, they returned to this timeline. Both realities exist. The poster has memories from both. This would explain the grief. If the wife and children were real in another timeline, then the loss is real. They still exist somewhere, somewhen, but the poster can't access that timeline anymore. They're locked into this one, the one where they're lying on a sidewalk with missing teeth. Another possibility is simulation theory. If reality is a simulation, then consciousness is software running on hardware we don't understand. Maybe during the trauma, the poster's consciousness briefly loaded a different simulation, a different program. They experienced that program fully, 10 years of simulated life. Then they were returned to the main program, the timeline where they're a college student who got assaulted. How do you reconcile the absolute reality of remembered experience with the impossibility of the timeline? The poster has memories, clear, detailed, emotional memories of a wife and children, of 10 years of life. But those 10 years happened in minutes of real time. Either the memories are false, or time is not what we think it is. What would you do if you woke up and realized your entire life, your spouse, your children, your career, was a dream? Would you be able to let go, or would you grieve? Would you look for them in crowds, in peripheral vision, in your dreams at night? The poster chose to grieve, chose to treat the loss as real. They cried themselves to sleep, hoping to see their wife in dreams. They still see their son occasionally. They honor those relationships, even though everyone tells them those people never existed. Consider this. If you experienced something that felt completely real, that created genuine emotions and attachments, does it matter whether it happened in consensus reality? The poster's love for their wife was real. Their joy in their son was real. The memories are real, even if the events didn't happen in this timeline. Or maybe the question is wrong. Maybe it's not about whether those people existed. Maybe it's about whether the experience was real. And by any measure that matters, emotional impact, lasting consequences, vivid memory, it was real.
We may never know for certain what happened during those minutes on the sidewalk, but there's one detail we haven't addressed yet. The son is still 5 years old. Years have passed since the assault. The poster wrote this account 3 years after the event, and the original post is now over a decade old. But when the poster sees their son in peripheral vision, he's still 5. Frozen at the age he was when the poster stared at the lamp, when reality broke down, when everything ended. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. Think about that. The son tries to communicate. The poster sees him, knows he's speaking, but can't hear the words. What is he trying to say? Is it a warning, a message, or just the remnant of a memory that won't fade? The poster lives with this, lives with catching glimpses of a child who never existed, lives with the knowledge that somewhere in their mind there's a complete family, a complete life, accessible only in fragments, in peripheral vision, in grief. They went through 3 years of horrid depression, 3 years of crying themselves to sleep, 3 years of hoping to see their wife in dreams. She never appeared, but the son did, still does. Why the son and not the wife? Why 5 years old and not older or younger? Maybe because the son represented pure joy. The poster wrote, "My son was the joy of my life." Not just love, joy. And that joy is what lingers, what refuses to fade completely, what appears at the edges of vision as a reminder of what was experienced, if not what was real. The poster used a throwaway account. They said, "This is really personal." They shared one of the most profound experiences of their life with strangers because they needed to tell someone, needed to have it documented, needed to know they weren't crazy. And the responses confirmed. Others have experienced this too. Not many, but enough that the pattern is recognizable, enough that researchers should pay attention, enough that dismissing it as impossible ignores documented human experience. The poster never did an AMA, never answered follow-up questions. The account was abandoned after this single post. They said what they needed to say and disappeared. But the story remains, reposted, shared, becoming part of internet folklore, one of the most haunting glitch stories ever told. What are the odds that getting knocked unconscious produces a complete, coherent, emotionally meaningful alternative life spanning a decade? What are the odds that the brain can generate and store that many detailed memories in minutes? What are the odds that grief for people who never existed lasts for years? The odds don't matter. It happened. Somewhere, there's a person who lived two lives, one that lasted decades, one that lasted minutes, both equally real to the person who experienced them, and they carry both sets of memories, both realities, both truths. Every time they catch movement in peripheral vision, they hope it's their son, still 5 years old, still trying to say something, still there even though he was never there. The poster ended with a note. They've never seen Inception or the Star Trek episode people mention. They've been told their experience matches fiction, but it's not fiction to them. It's memory. It's loss. It's a family they raised for 10 years who vanished the moment they understood the lamp wasn't real. Maybe consciousness can access other timelines. Maybe trauma opens doors to parallel lives. Maybe the brain can compress decades into minutes. Or maybe reality is far more flexible than we're willing to admit. The poster wrote, "Pre-med students, don't assume you know everything. We don't know how consciousness works. We don't know how memory forms. We don't know what happens to awareness during unconsciousness. We assume, we theorize, we build models, but we don't know. And until we do, stories like this remain. Experiences that violate our assumptions, lives lived in moments, children who appear in peripheral vision, lamps with impossible perspectives. Somewhere a person woke up on a sidewalk and lost a family. They still see their son sometimes. He's still 5, still trying to say something. Still there, even though he was never there."